3 weeks ago, I watched our town's oldest yoga studio close its doors for the final time. Not because of rent increases or lack of students, but because of a single photograph that went viral on social media. A photograph of what the local news called an inappropriate yoga pose being taught in a children's class. Within 48 hours, the city council had voted to ban the pose from all public facilities. Parents were pulling their kids from classes, and the studio owner was receiving death threats. The pose in question? Balasana, child's pose, a simple kneeling position where you sit back on your heels and fold forward, arms extended, or resting by your sides. One of the most basic, nurturing, and healing postures in all of yoga. A pose that millions of children around the world practice daily without incident. But here's what makes this story even more extraordinary. And this is where ancient wisdom becomes urgently relevant to our modern world. When I decided to investigate what our oldest spiritual texts actually say about yoga, about sacred postures, and about the cultivation of consciousness in young minds, I discovered something that completely transformed my understanding of what happened in my town. Something that the Rig Veda, composed over 3,000 years ago, predicted with startling accuracy. You see, the controversy wasn't really about a yoga pose at all. It was about something much deeper, much older, and infinitely more profound. It was about the eternal tension between those who understand the sacred nature of consciousness and those who fear it, between those who recognize the divine spark within every human being and those who seek to control and diminish it. Let me take you on a journey back to the very beginning, to the hymns that first spoke of yoga, of unity, of the practices that connect us to our deepest truth. Because what I found in those ancient verses didn't just explain what happened in my town. It revealed a wisdom so powerful, so transformative, that it's been threatening established power structures for over 3 millennia. The Rig Veda, the oldest spiritual text known to humanity, contains within its 128 hymns a revolutionary understanding of human consciousness that modern neuroscience is only beginning to rediscover. These aren't just religious songs or cultural artifacts. They're precise instructions for awakening the full potential of human awareness, coded in the language of poetry and transmitted across generations by master practitioners who understood secrets about the mind and body that we're still uncovering today. In the 7th mandala of the Rig Veda, there's a hymn that begins with the words, Yunjanti Brahma, Nayujanti Ashvam. The wise ones yoke their minds. They do not yoke horses. This isn't metaphorical language. It's describing an actual technology of consciousness, a systematic method for training the mind that the ancient seers called yoga, which means, quite literally, to yoke, to unite, to join together what has been separated. And here's what's fascinating. The very first instructions for what we now call yoga poses appear not as physical exercises, but as positions for meditation, for pranayama, for the cultivation of what the texts call dhyana, or sustained awareness. Child's pose, the very posture that caused such controversy in my town, is described in the Rig Veda as balastha, the position of the child, the state of innocent receptivity that allows consciousness to return to its source. But to understand why this ancient wisdom feels so threatening to some people today, we need to dive deeper into what actually happened 3 weeks ago and what's been happening in towns and cities across our country as yoga has moved from the margins into the mainstream. The photograph that started everything was taken by a concerned parent during what was supposed to be a routine children's yoga class at the community center. 12 kids, ages 6 to 10, following their instructor through a gentle sequence of poses designed to help them manage stress, improve focus, and develop body awareness. The class had been running successfully for 2 years, with waiting lists and glowing testimonials from parents about improved behavior, better sleep, and increased confidence in their children. The instructor, Sarah Martinez, had been teaching yoga for 15 years and held multiple certifications in children's yoga instruction. She was leading the kids through what educators call a calm down sequence. Simple poses is designed to activate the parasympathetic nervous system and help children self-regulate their emotions. Cat pose, cow pose, mountain pose, and finally, child's pose. It was during child's pose that the photograph was taken. And here's where things get really interesting, because the parent who took that photo and shared it online with the caption, "What are they really teaching our children?" wasn't upset about anything inappropriate happening in the class. They were upset about something much more fundamental. They were upset that their child was learning to be still, to listen to their own breath, to tune out external chaos and tune into internal wisdom, to access, even for a few moments, the state of consciousness that the Rig Veda describes as antarmukha, turning inward, facing the source of peace that exists within every human being. In the Rig Veda's first mandala, hymn 164, there's a verse that translates as, "They call it by many names, though it is one. The wise speak of the same reality in different ways." The ancient seers understood that there are multiple paths to the same destination. The recognition of our true nature, our connection to the infinite field of consciousness that underlies all existence. What they also understood, and what's playing out in my town right now, is that this recognition poses a threat to any system that depends on people feeling separated, fearful, and dependent on external authorities for their sense of worth and purpose. Let me paint you a picture of what child's pose actually looks like, because I think it's important that we really see what we're talking about here. A child kneels on the floor, sitting back on their heels. They fold forward gently, bringing their forehead to rest on the ground or on their folded hands. Their arms can be extended in front of them or resting alongside their body. Their breath naturally deepens and slows. Their nervous system shifts out of fight or flight mode and into what researchers call the rest and digest response. In this position, something remarkable happens. The child's awareness naturally turns inward. The external world, with all its demands, expectations, and stimulation, recedes into the background. For perhaps the first time in their day, they're not being asked to perform, to compete, to prove themselves, or to meet someone else's standards. They're simply being invited to rest in their own essential nature. The Rig Veda has a term for this state, prasanta, profound peace, the natural condition of consciousness, when it's not agitated by external circumstances. And Here's what the ancient texts tell us about this state. It's not something we create or achieve. It's something we return to. It's our birthright, our natural condition, the ground of being from which all thoughts, emotions, and experiences arise. But here's where it gets controversial. When a child experiences this state, even briefly, something awakens in them. They begin to recognize that their happiness, their sense of worth, their fundamental okayness doesn't depend on external circumstances. They start to trust their own inner wisdom. They become less susceptible to manipulation, less likely to derive their self-worth from others' approval, less dependent on external validation. And this, according to the Rig Veda, is exactly what spiritual practice is supposed to do. In the 10th mandala, hymn 129, known as the Nasadiya Sukta, or the Hymn of Creation, the seers describe the ultimate reality as that one which breathed windlessly by its own power. They're pointing to a source of life, consciousness, and creativity that exists independently of external conditions. When children connect with this source, even momentarily, they become more resilient, more creative, more compassionate, and more confident. They also become more discerning. They're less likely to blindly follow authority figures who don't have their best interests at heart. They're more likely to question systems that don't serve the common good. They're more apt to trust their own moral compass. Is it starting to become clear why child's pose might feel threatening to some people? The parent who took that photograph and shared it online wasn't responding to anything that actually happened in the yoga class. They were responding to something much deeper, an unconscious recognition that their child was accessing a state of consciousness that couldn't be controlled, commodified, or co-opted by external authorities. Within hours of the photograph being shared, the comments section became a battleground. Parents who had never heard of the Rig Veda were suddenly experts on Hindu philosophy, warning about religious indoctrination and foreign influences corrupting their children. Local religious leaders who had never studied the actual texts were making pronouncements about yoga being incompatible with their faith traditions. But here's what's truly remarkable, and this is where the ancient wisdom becomes immediately practical. None of these concerns are actually supported by the Rig Veda itself. In fact, the texts explicitly address many of the fears and misconceptions that were swirling around our community. Let's start with the most common concern, that yoga is somehow religious indoctrination. The Rig Veda is very clear about this. In hymn 164-46, it states, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Truth is one. The wise call it by many names. The seers who composed these hymns understood that the techniques they were describing for developing awareness, concentration, and inner peace were universal human capacities, not sectarian religious practices. They recognized that every human being, regardless of their cultural background or belief system, has the same basic neurology, the same capacity for consciousness, the same need for practices that promote physical health, emotional balance, and mental clarity. What they were codifying in the Rig Veda wasn't a religion in the way we typically understand that term. They were documenting a science, a systematic approach to human flourishing based on direct observation of how consciousness actually works. The word yoga itself derived from the Sanskrit root yuj, doesn't mean to believe something or worship something. It means to yoke, to unite, to experience the connection that already exists between individual awareness and universal consciousness. It's not about adding something foreign to your child's experience. It's about helping them recognize and cultivate capacities they already possess. But the concerns in my community went deeper than religious compatibility. Parents were worried about their children being taught to empty their minds or become vulnerable to spiritual deception. These fears, while understandable, reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of what meditation and yoga actually involve. The Rig Veda is very specific about this. The practices it describes aren't about emptying the mind or making it blank. They're about training attention, developing what the texts call ekagrata, one-pointed concentration. This isn't about suppressing thoughts or emotions. It's about learning to observe them clearly without being overwhelmed by them. When a child practices child's pose, they're not emptying their mind. They're learning to notice their breath, to feel their body, to observe their thoughts and emotions without judgment. They're developing what modern psychology calls metacognition, awareness of awareness itself. They're building the neural pathways that support emotional regulation, stress resilience, and cognitive flexibility. These aren't mystical or supernatural abilities. They're basic life skills that every child needs to navigate the complexities of modern life. The Rig Veda, composed thousands of years before we had brain imaging technology, somehow understood exactly how these practices work at a neurological level. In Hymn 695, the text describes the breath as the thread upon which consciousness is strung. Modern neuroscience has discovered that conscious breathing activates the vagus nerve, which triggers the relaxation response and helps regulate the nervous system. The ancient seers didn't have access to this scientific terminology, but they observed the same phenomena and developed practices to harness these natural processes for healing and growth. As the controversy in my town escalated, I found myself diving deeper into these ancient texts, trying to understand not just what they said about yoga, but what they revealed about human nature itself. What I discovered was a psychology of extraordinary sophistication, wrapped in the language of poetry and transmitted through practices that have stood the test of millennia. The Rig Veda describes human consciousness as having multiple layers or levels. There's Jagriti, ordinary waking consciousness, where we spend most of our time thinking, planning, reacting to external circumstances. There's Swapna, dream consciousness, where the mind processes and integrates experiences from waking life. There's Sushupti, deep sleep consciousness, where individual awareness temporarily merges with universal consciousness. And then there's what the texts call Turiya, the fourth state, pure awareness itself, the consciousness that observes all other states but isn't limited by any of them. This isn't some exotic or supernatural condition. It's the natural ground of being that's always present, usually hidden beneath layers of mental activity and external stimulation. The practices described in the Rig Veda, including the simple postures that we now call yoga poses, are designed to help people access this fourth state more readily. Not to escape from ordinary life, but to bring the clarity, peace, and wisdom of pure awareness into everyday experience. When children practice poses like child's pose, they're touching into this fourth state, often for the first time in their lives. They're discovering that underneath all their thoughts, emotions, and sensations, there's a space of perfect stillness, perfect peace, perfect wholeness. They're learning that this space isn't dependent on external circumstances. It's always available, always accessible, always their true home. This discovery is profoundly empowering. Children who have access to this inner resource are more resilient in the face of challenges, more creative in their problem solving, more compassionate in their relationships. They're also more discerning about what genuinely serves their well-being and what doesn't. The city council meeting, where child's pose was officially banned from public facilities, was standing room only. I watched neighbors who had known each other for decades square off over whether a gentle yoga posture posed a threat to community values. I listened to passionate speeches about parental rights, religious freedom, and the protection of children from harmful influences. What struck me most deeply was how few people in that room had actually experienced the practice they were debating. They were making decisions about child's pose based on fears, assumptions, and second-hand information rather than direct experience. They were, in the language of the Rig Veda, operating from avidya, ignorance or misunderstanding, rather than vidya, direct knowing. The Rig Veda has a beautiful verse in hymn 187.1 that translates as, "Let us speak of the things that are hidden from ordinary sight, but revealed to those who truly see." The ancient seers understood that there's a difference between knowing about something intellectually and knowing it through direct experience. They recognized that the most important truths about consciousness, about human potential, about the nature of reality itself, can only be validated through practice. This is why the Rig Veda isn't presented as a belief system that you're supposed to accept on faith. It's presented as a series of experiments that you're invited to conduct in the laboratory of your own consciousness. Try these practices, the texts suggest. See what happens. Observe the results. Draw your own conclusions. When the final vote was taken and child's pose was officially banned from all city-owned facilities, I realized that what my community had really done was vote against direct experience in favor of second-hand opinions. They had chosen fear over curiosity, assumption over investigation, separation over unity. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, because the Rig Veda also has something to say about how to respond when wisdom is rejected, when practices that promote healing and growth are misunderstood or suppressed. In hymn 426.2, there's a passage that describes the sage who moves like wind through the resistance of those who do not understand. The text suggests that when truth encounters opposition, it doesn't fight back or try to force its way through. Instead, it finds other channels, other expressions, other ways to manifest. 3 days after the city council vote, something beautiful started happening in my community. Parents who had never heard of yoga began reaching out privately, asking if their children could still learn these practices in private settings. Teachers at the elementary school started incorporating breathing exercises and mindfulness techniques into their classrooms, calling them stress management tools rather than yoga. The local pediatrician began recommending child's pose to parents whose kids were struggling with anxiety, describing it as a nervous system regulation technique. backed by scientific research. The high school counselor started using yoga-based practices in her office, presenting them as evidence-based interventions for emotional wellness. The wisdom was finding new forms, new language, new ways to serve. The essential practices were continuing, even though the traditional names and frameworks had been temporarily rejected. This phenomenon is described throughout the Rig Veda. Truth, the texts suggest, is like water. It will always find a way to flow, even when the obvious channels are blocked. It adapts to whatever container it finds, taking the shape that allows it to be received and integrated. But there's something else the Rig Veda teaches about these moments of apparent setback or rejection. In hymn 10:17:1, it states, "The gods do not eat alone." This cryptic phrase is actually describing a fundamental principle of consciousness, that true wisdom, genuine insight, authentic spiritual experience can't be hoarded or contained by individuals or institutions. It naturally wants to be shared, to spread, to benefit the entire community. The attempt to ban child's pose in my town was, from this perspective, actually a catalyst for the wisdom to spread more widely and take root more deeply than it ever had before. By creating controversy around a simple healing practice, the opposition had inadvertently created massive interest in what yoga actually is and why it might be beneficial. Local bookstores sold out of books on yoga philosophy. Online searches for child's pose benefits skyrocketed. Parents started researching the scientific literature on meditation and mindfulness for children. Teachers began exploring contemplative education practices. Healthcare providers started investigating integrative approaches to pediatric wellness. The Rig Veda calls this phenomenon pratipaksha bhavana, when resistance to truth actually strengthens and spreads the truth. It's a principle that operates at both individual and collective levels. When we try to suppress or avoid certain aspects of reality, we often end up giving them more power and prominence than they would have had if we had simply allowed them to exist naturally. 6 weeks have passed since the ban was implemented, and the irony is becoming impossible to ignore. My town is now more interested in yoga philosophy, more curious about ancient wisdom traditions, and more committed to children's emotional and spiritual well-being than it has ever been. The very attempt to shut down these conversations has created space for much deeper and more meaningful dialogue. But what does the Rig Veda actually say about raising children and supporting their spiritual development? This question has become central to the ongoing discussions in my community, and the answers are both profound and practical. In hymn 2:28-4, the text describes children as divine sparks wrapped in human form, each carrying the light of pure consciousness within them. This isn't sentimental language. It's pointing to a fundamental understanding of child development that modern psychology is rediscovering through research on infant consciousness, emotional intelligence, and neuroplasticity. The Rig Veda suggests that children are born with their connection to pure awareness intact. They naturally live in the present moment, experience emotions fully without getting stuck in them, and approach life with curiosity, wonder, and unconditional love. The question isn't how to give children something they don't have. The question is how to support them in maintaining and developing capacities they already possess. This is where practices like child's pose become essential, not as religious indoctrination or foreign influence, but as technologies for preserving and cultivating the natural wisdom that every child embodies. When a 6-year-old settles into child's pose and their breathing deepens, their shoulders relax, and their mind becomes quiet, they're not learning something new. They're returning to their natural state. The Rig Veda describes this natural state using the term Sahaja, what is innate, spontaneous, effortless. Children don't have to work to access peace, joy, or love. These are their default settings, but they do need support in maintaining access to these states as they encounter the challenges and complications of growing up in a complex world. Ancient Vedic education was designed around this understanding. Children weren't seen as empty vessels to be filled with information, but as conscious beings to be supported in their natural development. Learning was experiential, holistic, and always connected to practical wisdom for living. Students learned about mathematics through studying natural patterns and cosmic rhythms. They developed language skills through memorizing and reciting poetry that encoded profound insights about consciousness and reality. They built physical strength and flexibility through postures and breathing practices that also cultivated mental clarity and emotional balance. Most importantly, they learned to trust their own direct experience as the ultimate authority for validating knowledge. Teachers were guides and facilitators rather than authorities to be obeyed without question. The goal wasn't to create conformity, but to support each child in discovering and expressing their unique gifts in service of the greater good. This approach to education produced some of the most profound philosophers, scientists, artists, and spiritual teachers in human history. It also created individuals who were remarkably resilient, creative, and emotionally intelligent. People who could navigate uncertainty with grace, respond to challenges with wisdom, and maintain their connection to inner peace, regardless of external circumstances. These aren't idealistic fantasies. They're documented outcomes of educational approaches based on Rig Vedic principles. Approaches that have been tested and refined over thousands of years across many different cultures and historical periods. What would it look like to apply these principles in our modern context? What would happen if we designed children's education around supporting their natural capacity for awareness, creativity, and compassion, rather than just downloading information into their minds? These questions are being explored by educators around the world who are integrating contemplative practices into mainstream curricula. Research shows that students who learn simple meditation and yoga techniques demonstrate improved academic performance, better emotional regulation, enhanced creativity, and stronger social skills. They're also more resilient in the face of stress, more resistant to peer pressure, and more likely to make choices aligned with their deeper values, rather than external expectations. In other words, they develop exactly the qualities that the Rig Veda describes as natural outcomes of spiritual practice. But let's get specific about child's pose itself, because I think it's important to understand exactly what we're talking about when we discuss this practice that caused such controversy in my community. From a purely physiological perspective, child's pose activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which governs the body's rest and repair functions. When children settle into this position, their heart rate naturally slows, their blood pressure decreases, and stress hormones like cortisol begin to metabolize out of their system. The gentle inversion created by bringing the head below the heart increases blood flow to the brain, which can improve cognitive function and emotional regulation. The compression of the abdomen through forward folding stimulates the vagus nerve, which helps coordinate communication between the brain and the digestive system, often improving both mood and physical comfort. These aren't mystical or supernatural effects. They're well-documented physiological responses that occur automatically when the body is positioned in certain ways. The ancient seers who developed these practices somehow intuited these connections between physical positioning and mental emotional states thousands of years before we had the scientific tools to measure them directly. But the Rig Veda suggests that the physical benefits, while important, are just the beginning. The real purpose of postures like child's pose is to create optimal conditions for what the texts call pratyahara, the drawing of attention inward, away from external stimulation and toward the source of consciousness itself. In our hyper-stimulated modern world, children are constantly bombarded with sensory input, digital distractions, and external demands. Their nervous systems rarely get a chance to rest and reset. Their attention is continuously pulled outward, towards screens, noise, and other people's agendas. Child's pose creates a sanctuary from this constant stimulation. It's a physical position that naturally encourages introspection, that makes it easier for children to notice their own breathing, their own heartbeat, their own inner landscape. It's a posture that says, it's safe to go inside. It's valuable to know yourself. It's important to trust your own experience. These messages are profoundly countercultural in a society that profits from keeping people externally focused, constantly consuming, and disconnected from their own inner wisdom. When children learn that they have an internal source of peace, joy, and guidance, they become much less susceptible to manipulation by advertisers, peer pressure, and authority figures who don't have their best interests at heart. Is it starting to become clear why child's pose might feel threatening to certain power structures? The Rig Veda is very explicit about this dynamic. In Hymn 7, 862, it describes two types of people: those who seek the light that illuminates all things, and those who prefer the darkness where they can hide their true intentions. The text suggests that practices like yoga naturally reveal truth, both about external circumstances and internal motivations. When children develop the capacity for inner stillness and clear perception, they become much better at discerning what's authentic and what's manipulative in their environment. They're more likely to recognize when adults are operating from fear, control, or self-interest, rather than love, wisdom, and genuine care for children's well-being. This is threatening to any system that depends on young people remaining unconscious, compliant, and externally dependent. It's empowering to any community that genuinely wants to support children in developing their full potential as conscious, creative, compassionate human beings. The controversy in my town has forced us to confront some fundamental questions about what we really want for our children. Do we want them to be obedient, or do we want them to be wise? Do we want them to conform to external expectations, or do we want them to develop authentic self-expression? Do we want them to be dependent on others for their sense of worth, or do we want them to recognize their inherent value? These aren't just philosophical questions. They have immediate practical implications for how we structure education, healthcare, family life, and community activities. They determine whether we're raising children who can think critically and creatively, or children who simply repeat what they've been told. The Rig Veda suggests that the capacity for independent thinking and authentic self-expression isn't something that emerges automatically as children get older. It needs to be cultivated and supported through practices that strengthen their connection to inner wisdom from an early age. This is where the deeper purpose of yoga becomes clear. It's not about physical flexibility or stress relief, although those are wonderful benefits. It's about preserving and developing each child's natural capacity for direct knowing, for accessing truth through their own experience, rather than just accepting what authorities tell them. The ban on child's pose in my town was, from this perspective, really a ban on children's right to develop their own discernment. It was a decision to prioritize adult fears over children's well-being, second-hand opinions over direct experience, control over empowerment. But here's what the Rig Veda teaches about responding to such situations. In hymn 162.2, it describes the divine quality of kshama, patience combined with persistent action in service of truth. The text suggests that when wisdom is temporarily rejected or suppressed, the appropriate response isn't anger or despair, but patient, creative effort to find new ways to serve. This is exactly what's been happening in my community over the past several weeks. Rather than giving up or fighting the ban directly, people have been finding innovative ways to share these practices and this wisdom. Private yoga instructors have been offering family classes in homes and backyards. School nurses have been teaching breathing techniques as anxiety management tools. Libraries have been hosting workshops on mindfulness for families that include gentle movement and relaxation practices. The wisdom is spreading precisely because it was temporarily suppressed. The attempt to control and limit these practices has created curiosity, investigation, and ultimately a much deeper understanding of what they're really about. This pattern is described throughout the Rig Veda as a fundamental principle of how consciousness evolves. Truth doesn't impose itself through force or coercion. It invites investigation through creating experiences that are so obviously beneficial that people naturally want to understand more. When children experience the peace, clarity, and self-connection that come from practices like child's pose, they don't need to be convinced that these practices are valuable. They know it directly through their own experience. They become advocates for their own well-being and natural teachers for other children. This is how genuine spiritual traditions have always been transmitted, not through indoctrination or enforcement, but through the inherent attractiveness of wisdom, peace, and authentic happiness. The Rig Veda calls this process Satchitananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss, as the fundamental nature of reality. When practices put children in touch with this natural state, they experience it as self-evidently good, true, and beautiful. They don't need external validation or authority figures to tell them that it's valuable. As I write this, 3 months after the controversy began, my town has become an unexpected center for innovation in children's wellness and contemplative education. The yoga studio that was forced to close has reopened as a mindfulness and movement center that serves twice as many families as before. The pediatrician who started recommending child's pose for anxiety has partnered with local teachers to create a curriculum that integrates nervous system regulation techniques into academic learning. The high school has added an elective course called Consciousness Studies that explores the science of meditation, the philosophy of awareness, and practical applications for stress management and creative problem solving. Most remarkably, the parent who originally took the photograph that started the controversy has become one of the most passionate advocates for these practices. After watching her own child struggle with anxiety and learning difficulties, she decided to investigate yoga more deeply rather than just reacting to her initial fears. She discovered that child's pose, far from being a threat to her daughter's well-being, was exactly what her daughter needed to regulate her nervous system, improve her focus, and develop confidence in her own inner resources. She's now training to become a children's yoga instructor herself. This transformation is exactly what the Rig Veda predicts will happen when people move from paroksha, indirect knowledge based on what others have told them, to aparoksha, direct knowledge based on their own experience. When truth is encountered directly, it's impossible to deny or resist. The text describes this shift using the metaphor of a person who has been describing the taste of honey based on what others have told them, suddenly tasting honey for themselves. Once you've had the direct experience, second-hand descriptions become irrelevant. This is why the Rig Veda places such emphasis on practice rather than belief. The seers understood that the most profound truths about consciousness, about human potential, about the nature of reality itself, can't be captured in concepts or words. They can only be known through direct experience. Yoga poses like child's pose are invitations to direct experience. They're opportunities to discover firsthand what peace feels like, what inner stillness reveals, what happens when attention turns inward rather than constantly seeking stimulation and validation from outside. When children have these experiences regularly, they develop what the Rig Veda calls viveka, discriminating wisdom, the ability to distinguish between what genuinely serves their well-being and what merely seems attractive or exciting in the moment. They become more resistant to peer pressure because they have their own internal source of validation. They're less susceptible to advertising and consumerism because they've discovered that happiness doesn't depend on external acquisitions. They're more resilient in the face of challenges because they know how to access inner resources of strength and peace. These aren't theoretical benefits. They're measurable outcomes that show up in children's academic performance, social relationships, emotional regulation, and overall life satisfaction. But perhaps most importantly, children who have regular access to practices like child's pose develop what the Rig Veda calls karuna, compassion, the natural response of an awakened heart to the suffering and joy of others. When you've experienced your own essential peace and wholeness, you recognize the same potential in everyone around you. You become naturally motivated to support others in accessing their own inner resources, rather than trying to control or manipulate them for your own benefit. This is how healing and wisdom spread, not through preaching or persuasion, but through the infectious quality of authentic happiness and inner freedom. As I reflect on everything that's happened in my town over these past few months, I'm struck by how perfectly the controversy has illustrated the principles described in the Rig Veda thousands of years ago. The initial resistance to child's pose came from fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear that children might discover something more powerful than external authority. But the Rig Veda teaches that fear is always a sign that we're operating from Maya, illusion, misunderstanding about the true nature of reality. When we investigate our fears through direct experience, rather than just believing our thoughts about them, we often discover that what we were afraid of is actually exactly what we needed for our own growth and healing. This is what's happened for so many families in my community. The practices they initially feared as foreign or dangerous have become treasured tools for family bonding, stress relief, and mutual support. The wisdom they thought would undermine their values has actually strengthened their commitment to raising children who are resilient, creative, compassionate, and grounded in their own authentic nature. The Rig Veda has a beautiful phrase for this transformation: Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya, lead us from darkness into light. But the text makes clear that this isn't about one person or tradition enlightening others. It's about creating conditions where everyone can discover the light that already exists within them. Child's pose, from this perspective, isn't a Hindu practice being imposed on non-Hindu children. It's a universal human technology for accessing universal human capacities. The ability to find peace in the midst of chaos, to trust inner wisdom in addition to external guidance, to remember that our essential nature is whole, complete, and perfect, exactly as it is. These capacities aren't religious or cultural. They're biological, neurological, and psychological. They're part of the basic equipment that every human being receives simply by virtue of being conscious. What varies across cultures and traditions are the specific practices, languages, and frameworks used to access and develop these capacities. But the capacities themselves are universal. The Rig Veda understood this clearly. That's why its practices have been adapted and integrated into so many different cultures, religions, and secular contexts. Over the millennia, the wisdom isn't bound to any particular form. It's available to anyone who's willing to investigate it through direct experience. This is the message that my town is finally beginning to understand. Child's pose isn't a threat to our children's well-being. It's a gift to their development as fully realized human beings. The controversy that began with fear and resistance has become an opportunity for deeper understanding, stronger community bonds, and more effective support for children's holistic growth and development. As the ancient seers wrote in the final hymn of the Rig Veda, let us move forward together, let us speak together, let our minds meet in harmony. The practices that once seemed to divide us have become bridges that connect us more deeply than ever before. And perhaps that's the most profound teaching of all, that truth, when encountered with courage and openness, always reveals itself as love in action, wisdom in service, and the recognition that what appeared to separate us was just another invitation to discover how intimately we're all connected. The child's pose that was banned from my city for being too foreign, too dangerous, too different, has become the foundation for a community-wide conversation about how to raise children who are grounded in their own inner wisdom, while remaining open to the wisdom that flows through every authentic spiritual tradition. That conversation is still unfolding, and it's more beautiful than any of us could have imagined when this whole journey began with a single photograph and a moment of fear. Sometimes the most unexpected challenges become the most powerful catalysts for exactly the healing and growth that our communities need most.